Two iconic buffers, one showdown. Will a legendary, mythical, magical buffer known as the Klon buffer win? Or will a newcomer, the leaky germanium transistor buffer, have a little surprise in store? Hello people, Joe from Hello Sailor Effects here. Welcome to today's video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at two buffers. One is the legendary Klon buffer that we've all seen me use before, and I'm going to be pitting it against the newcomer, a buffer designed by AMZ online that uses leaky germanium transistors. No longer will we have to throw them away. Get on. So I'm going to build both circuits into this pedal with a switch between them, and we're going to see which one sounds better. Cheers. Which is going to be better? We have our germanium buffer over this side, so we're not throwing away any of our old germanium transistors that have gone out of spec. And we also have the legendary, the mythical, the unicorn, the Klon buffer. So over this side I'm going to build a Klon buffer, and over this side we've got our large components and tag board to make a germanium buffer. Now, when it comes to the germanium buffer, we've got a choice, because I've pulled out two from my unusable stash. We have a Mullard OCP 71 photo transistor, germanium, or we have an NKT 271 germanium transistor. Both of them were either too leaky or too low in gain for me to use. But however, supposedly, I've never built this before, but supposedly it doesn't matter in this circuit. So we shall see. I'd like to know which one of these two you would choose if you were building this circuit for yourself. Let me know in the comments. We're going to start off with my least favourite to build, and that is the Klon buffer. Nothing against the Klon buffer, I think it sounds great, but I really hate using this Vero board or strip board, whatever you want to call it. It's just fiddly, and I've left me red pen at home so I can't mark out the areas that we're going to cut, which is going to be the first thing we start with. So if you would like to support the Hello Sailor Effects channel by sporting some merch, you too can get a t-shirt with my favourite guitar, wonky at an angle, on the front of it. Check out the store below. The first cut we're going to make, basically, when I say cut, what we mean is these tracks here make a circuit, and to stop the track, what we have to do is split in this hole. We'll split the track basically, so then the signal can't get down it, and that makes this two different wires, if you like. Or anyway, first track split is going to be the sixth one along from the left at the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so all I do is, I've got a really good red pen at home now. I just dab the top here and it dabs it and it wicks right in so you can see it from the bottom. But this is what we're going to do. There's one split. Then, if we move two holes along, 1, 2, after that is going to be another split. This split, however, is underneath the IC. So it's going to be 4 pins deep because we want the two halves of the IC to be separate. So there's that. Now, the third row up with 2, 3, the fourth one along on the third row up. So 1, 2, 3, there's the third row up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth one along. That's also going to be a split. Now all I do, you can get a drill bit for this, which is the right size, and by hand twist it in, and it breaks the track. Used to sell them on Small Bear Electronics many years ago. Anyway, I can just about make the pencil lead out. What I do is I take my Stanley blade. Have you met my mate Stanley?
Fucking Chelsea, aren't you?
Yeah. You flash cockney bastards. You know Stanley?
Anyway, we've done that gag. Take the Stanley blade and I put it in the hole, and I just use it to create like a circular motion and carve out the copper in the way. One full rotation and you get that kind of thing, and that's the break in the circuit we're looking for. So there's that one. We've also got one up here. If you are going to use a Stanley knife or a Stanley blade, please be careful. They are damn sharp, and I have cut myself more than once because I'm a little bit dense when it comes to things like that. Now, this top one on the top row, I like to also split this line at the top. This line doesn't need to be there. You could cut it out if you wanted, but I like to split this too, because inadvertently, if I'm soldering thick components on, it might touch this and then it will make the circuit or somewhere else and cause problems. So I just like to give it a little slice like this and just eliminate that from being able to happen. So now even if I was to solder to that, it's not going to go anywhere and we're all good. Now we've got our 4 going all the way down. I tend not to build with Vero board because it's fiddly, it's hard to use, you have to use sensible components. I've never been sensible in my life. And also people like Simon from JSA Effect Pedals build with it so well that that kind of makes a mockery of what I do. So it's better for me to stick to my old tag board. But for this, we want to see whether the Klon buffer can beat this Germanium buffer for tone buffer, we call it? I don't know. Anyway, we want to see, so I figured it'd be fun to build the Klon buffer too. And the Klon buffer, believe it or not, is a really simple buffer. It sounds great. There's a reason why Mr. Finnegan put the almost always sounds better sign on it, on the KTR. Right, so there's that. Next, I like to move on to the links. So whenever I'm doing Vero boards, I always do the splits first and then I move on to the links. And I'm just going to use some of the legs from previous builds to make the links out of. I always give them a clean first, even though I probably just cleaned them when I was using the leg. Thus, the first link is going to go round the top 2, just on the inboard side of the top 2 cuts next to the IC. This will link pins 1 and 2 of the IC together. Now, on the drawing I've got, it says that the IC should be a TLO 72, which is a JFET, I believe. Sounds great. It's probably my favourite op amp, but I was rushing when I was packing this up and I didn't have one to hand. And rather than be late coming to work because I'm duty, I definitely don't want to be late. I instead picked up a Texas Instruments 4558P. So still a dual op amp. It'll do the job, and that's what's going in this one. Now the next link goes from the bottom split to the row below it, like he says, if you can get it in, like so. I'm just going to solder them in place and then we'll move on to our resistors. And so usually I move on to the resistors next, but because we've got an IC, I'm going to put the IC socket in next so then I know exactly where that's going to fit in case I have to manipulate any of the resistors around it. And the IC socket basically goes with the cuts next to one set of legs and the links next to the other set of legs on the outside. So like that. You should have 2 holes to the right hand side of each leg on this side. I'll just lie that down like that, and then I can wet the tip, and just solder all of them in place like so. You don't have to use IC sockets, but I do advise it. Work phone. That's our IC socket soldered in. As you can see, soldered in place. Next we're going to move on to our resistors. So we have our 3 100k resistors. Now because I'm using a small perf board or Vero board, I've gone with smaller components for this. I know that's boring, but they just fit on a bit easier. So the first one is going in 2 rows across from the bottom. So 1, 2 rows across from the bottom and in, and then it's skipping past 2 rows. So 1, 2, skip past, and it's going into the 4th row. Now, when I do this, because my brain works in probably a different way to everyone else's, once I've added the component in, I like to just count the circles above that are supposed to be left. I can see on my drawing that there are 3 circles above. So 1, 2, 3 circles above, and I know I've got the components in the right place. Then all I do is I'll just spread the legs out a bit so it can't go anywhere. And then while I'm here, I'm going to add in the other 200k resistors before I start soldering. There's space to get them on, so I'm not like flipping the board over every 5 seconds. Now, this one's going in the next row along. It is going in the top, missing 2, and then going in just before that split. So there's the split, 1, 2 below it, and we're good. It probably sounds like I'm talking absolute gibberish here, but another work call. More work calls. We have this absolute nightmare thing on the base at the minute, where all under 18s have to be counted in and counted out fine because it's parental guardianship or whatever. But for them to go to bed, they have to come and physically hand their ID card into me and get ticked off a list and then sent to bed. It's a nightmare, especially on a Sunday when everyone's travelling back from leave. Anywho, so we've got our 2 100k resistors in there, and we've got 1 left to go. Let me tell you, I've got 2 years left in the Navy, and I signed for these extra 2 years, and I'm thinking, what did I do? So it was meant to be the 18th of November next month is me done full 22, pensioned out and all that jazz. I just couldn't say no, and I signed again. Anyway, right, so the last 100k resistor is going to go right at the end from the top straight down to the bottom. There. And then I'll bend the legs out. Because it's the top and bottom, I can bend the legs right the way out. There we go. Now I'm going to solder all 3 of these in. Customary wetting of the tip. Now I like to solder 1 resistor at a time. So I'll solder both them legs. And then I'll go back to this resistor, just so then you're not putting too much heat in the component at any one time. But to be honest, resistors are pretty hardy things. You'd be hard pushed to burn one out. You're doing well if you have. So there we are, our 100k resistors added. Next, I'm going to go on to this one, which is a bit of a pain in the backside. So I've had to put 2 resistors together to get 560 ohms. It is on the output. Now I built one of these for my mate Anjay. I'll link his channel above. Actually, he's got an amazing guitar channel. But I built him one and I put 500k instead of 500 ohms in here. So he had to modify it after the fact, with lots of help from God himself when it comes to pedals, which is Simon from JSA Effects. Give him a hand. But yeah, sorry about that, mate, if you're watching. Oops. I was rushing to get it to him, actually. That's what it is. There we go. So spread the legs out, and I know that I've got 1 below this. Yep, and then straight in from the top. So I know I've got it in the right position. Now what I haven't done is soldered this helicopter bit at the top. If you can see that, can we get it in focus? There you go. I haven't soldered that. I should have by now. So what I'm going to do is first I'll solder the bottom in, and then we'll turn it over and we'll sort the join out. Right, so there's our 560 ohm resistor, and I'll just solder these 2 together, the twist or join, whatever you want to call it. I always call it the helicopter just because it's twisting together. I know it's childish, whatever. There we are. And now we're going to move on to the last resistor, which is this 1 meg resistor. Now this goes in one hole space below the cut here. So there's a cut right there, hole below it, and then it goes in and it runs all the way to the end. Like that. There we are. So I'm going to solder that in place. There we are. Now we're going to move on to our capacitors. I'm going to start in the top left hand corner with this 1UF cap. I'm using a JB cap. These are really good quality. I started using them because I see Marcus Reeves from Reeves Electro using them. And I definitely put my hand in the fire if he put his hand in the fire. They're great caps. So this thing goes one across from the end and in the top two holes. And the AF, which is the short lead, goes in the top hole, and that'll sit just like that. And because it's a small cap, it fits on this teeny board without any issues, which is why I'm using it. Then we have a 47 UF cap, and now for another small one, I've got this Nichicon. It's a Japanese made cap. These are great. These are what are used in the old Analog Man pedals. So if he's using them, then you know they're good. There is a lot of fakes about, so if you find cheap ones, the fact of the matter is it probably is too good to be true. I know Analog mics run into a few problems with ordering them and fake ones turning up. This one goes below the IC in the same row as the cuts, which is 4th row along, 1, 2, 3, 4. The AF points upwards, so the live goes in the bottom row. And it actually misses a trace in the middle, so it won't sit as flush and as nice as that last one. So it goes in the 3rd row from the bottom and sits like that. That's about as low as I can get it without distorting the bottom of it. I don't want to force it. And so let's get them soldered in. Who wants the plates bets how long it takes another one of the recruits to phone my work phone and ask if they can hand their ID card in early? Good God. God help us all. Let's hope we don't have to fight the Spanish Armada again, eh? Anyway, let's clean these legs up, get these out the way. I'm not sure when it happened that I become that old moaning chief. I was like, oh, it wasn't like that in my day, but it's definitely happened. I suppose it happens to the best of us, eh? Alright, last but not least is the input cap. That goes directly below this one, so it is in the 3rd row down. 1, 2, 3, goes in here. And it misses a row and then goes in here. It goes in the next one, and there should be 2 holes below it. And as we can see, 1, 2 holes below it, so I know it's in the right place. I'm not a massive fan of using box caps. I've started using them more often than not, though, when I'm using Vero board or strip board, just because they fit so well on it. I mean, it's what they were designed for, let's face it, and they're just nice and easy to use. So maybe it's my old age. I'm going with easier as opposed to using ridiculous size components on here. But anyway, I'll let myself off because the next buffer we're building has silly size components and vintage germanium transistors, so I suppose it's not that bad. Right, that's all of our capacitors in. Next, because this is a Vero board, I like to attach the wires to it before I install it into the enclosure, because you can't really get to the underside of it. So you have to do the wires a little bit longer than they would need to be. So first of all, we've got a 9 volt coming from that side, a 9 volt wire. Then we've got ground input and output on this side. So 3 wires on this side. All I'm going to do is get them all together. That's right. I like this silicone wire. It's flexible and easy to use, and it doesn't heat damage as much as others. But get them all together, strip the ends, and then just give them a twist and tin them, and they should be good for use in the Vero board. There we go. Now, I always tend to make them a little bit too long. They don't need to be that long, but whatever. So, we've got a 9-volt in the top row on the right hand side. I'll put that in there first. This is where them little handy arms that hold it for you would be, or you know, the stand that you can place it in. That would be great for this, but I like to suffer on, what can I say. And now the output, input and ground go in successive holes, one up from the bottom. So our output goes in here. And I'm telling you, as if you're not following it on the schematic if you're going to buy it, or buy it if you're going to build it, or following it off the layout. So there we are. I'll just quickly solder them in place. A little bit more difficult when you haven't got anything holding it down for you, but there we go. There we are, that's our Vero board all soldered up. Now, before I even think about putting it in the enclosure or moving on, I like to run a razor blade between all the tracks, because the amount of times that I've built a pedal, put it all together, and it not work, or it have some weird sort of crackling. In fact, I've got a delay at the minute that I've done this with. I forgot to run the razor blade down, and it's got some sort of weird crackling sound on the repeat side. And I'm guessing I've messed something up on the actual Vero board itself, because, well, it's fiddly, innit? So once I've run the razor blade down them all, just give it a quick Mark 1 eyeballing. Yeah, that's good to go. Now at this point, because like I say it in all videos, I'm absolutely going to forget to put the IC in there, and it won't work. So I'm going to just place that in, making sure that, I don't know if you can see it on there, yeah, that little dot is at the top, because that's what the diagram stipulates. And of course, if you get it the wrong way around, the pinout will be wrong and you won't get any amplification, albeit 1-to-1 amplification. So there we are, let's clip it in place, and that is our Klon buffer ready to go. Now let's move on to the germanium. We have our germanium buffer. This is from the AMZ site, made by that legend that is Mark. So it'll be spelled like layout by Mark, but it'll be IVI for the M. He's done hundreds of layouts. Probably every pedal I've ever built has been laid out by this guy. He's fantastic. I've never built this before, so this is going to be a new one on me. Now, when it comes to germanium transistors, before we start building, I use this, the Alice DCA 55. Now, these two transistors were just in my box of out of spec, cannot use transistors. So I don't actually know what values they are, because I was rushing when I was packing to come to work. So I just grabbed two that look good. I'm a massive fan of new market transistors, so I grabbed the NKT271, but also the photo transistors usually grab a crowd because they look good. So let's see. There is a low battery warning on my unit because I'm too lazy to change the battery. Apologies. So it's a PNP transistor. Good. we've got our pin out, okay, HFE of 58, so that's a little bit low, but it would still be usable. And the leakage is 0.62, so actually this is usable in a Abbey Road fuzz Q1 position, so I'm not going to be using this in this this AMZ PNP germanium buffer, because I want to test that you can use out of spec transistors to power this unit, so that then I can use my out of spec transistors in the future. So let's see where we are with the NKT 271. So it's not the 275, the super duper rare and coveted one. You know, you can say what you like about them in the comments and it all being a fad or whatever, but for historical accuracy, then I'm a fan. So PNP germanium, pin out. It's got a gain of 61, which is still within the range of me using it. However, the leakage is 0.155. Now actually, there are applications that you could use this. So I'm not sure how I've pulled out two almost usable transistors. I mean, this wouldn't be any good for the fuzz, for the Abbey Road fuzz, but I could possibly get away with it for the Rangemaster. So it's a shame to use it in this, but I'm gonna, because I have to. That's all I've got here. So I'll put that to one side and we'll get onto our components. Now let me see which way am I going to orientate it. That way round. First component is going to be a link from here to here. So I'm going to use a bit of an old leg from a previous build. As I say, and I say it again, always keep your old legs from your previous builds, because you'll get to use them for something like this. Now I'm just going to solder in the top side. Reason being is there's going to be another component go into the bottom. So next on our, so actually while we're talking about it, this unit has some components that are mounted outside of the center of this tag board, and usually what I do is I'll wire up the center and then move on to them components afterwards. So the next component is a 47UF, I'm looking at the wrong part there, 470K resistor. I'm using this vintage Philips resistor. I think come from Poland actually. I'm not sure where I bought this one from, but it's got really thick legs. I like these ones. They're great for fuzz faces. And it goes through the next lug along on the top, and the same lug as our component leg from before. Now also there's a 1 meg coming from here to here. Now normally I like to mount these outside, but there's also another component going outside there, so I'm going to go ahead and mount it on the board, just because it keeps it out the way for the next bit. So now we can go ahead and solder this first lug that we're messing with. There we are. There's our first part done. I'd love to know if anyone actually watches these videos and solders along with me, or maybe do you just take the schematic that I put up or the layout that I put up and make the circuit afterwards, or do you just watch the videos? I'd love to know what people do. Please let me know in the comments. It'd be interesting to see if anyone actually follows it like in a step-by-step manner. Would you like me to show you every component being soldered in at a time, or do you like it when I cut to the next bit where I show it soldered and then move on, explain the next part and then move on quicker? It's completely up to you guys. I'm happy to do it any way that you like. Anyway, next is our first 1UF cap, and that is going to go right across here. Now it's awkward to fit these in, but I don't want to fit it through these centre holes like I normally would, because we're going to have a component going over the top here, and I don't want it to get in the way. Although I have a feeling it's going to be really hard to squeeze everything in this one, just because I'm using a lot in a small space. And actually I've got 2 of these audiofiler caps left. These are my last 2, I believe. So to fit it in here, because they're wider, you could now bend the legs back on themselves in that sort of fashion, but I don't do that. What I do is I'll bend them in on themselves down to make this sort of shape. Yeah, and then I'll bend them out on themselves again to make this sort of shape, and then that way when I slide it in, we can slide one end in all the way to the end, or all the way down its travel, give the other side a snip so then there's nothing hanging over the edge of the tag, and then just slide this other end straight in as if it was a smaller component. And all that'll happen is it'll sit higher on the board, but as we're not constrained for space, it doesn't really matter. Now I can solder this bottom end in because there's nothing else going in here. Now to make space for the next component coming through, I'm just going to manipulate the legs of the 2 components that are in this top lug. So this cap and the 470k resistor. I'm going to manipulate the legs so then there's a gap in between them, so then I can slide our next component in, which is a 470k resistor. Which, if I'd have thought about it, I might have used a different one instead of another one of these Phillips ones, because the leg again is quite thick. So we've got our 1UF non-polar cap, which has pretty thick silver legs, and then you've got our 2 Phillips resistors that also have quite thick legs. So this is going to be a bit of a hassle. He says no, it's went straight in. It's made me a liar. Get in. What a nice surprise. So I use the same method where I put the component all the way through to the end, snip off the excess, and then drag it back through so it sits in the middle of the tag board. Now I can solder in this side with the 3 components in because there's nothing else going in there. There we go. Right, now the other end of this 470k resistor is going to meet a 10k resistor going straight up and attaching it into the tag opposite. And here's our 10k resistor. Again, these sort of, I think these are metal film resistors. I think I've seen Marcus Reeves again using these. Only I think maybe he uses the 2-watt versions, so the bigger ones. This is only a 1-watt, and they're great quality and fairly cheap. So there's no vintage mojo, but they are amazing performance, and they sound great. There's no noise, all of that jazz. I mean, how does a resistor sound? Come on, there's a debate for the comments. Now, to me, the older carbon comps sound different because they're A, old, and the values change slightly, and B, they manage to suck up a load of water, especially if you're reclaiming them from like an amplifier or a radio or something over the years. If you think Johnny's nana's had it in her kitchen since 1957 or something, in all that moisture environment, it's going to suck up some moisture, and then as the radio heats up or what have you, especially if it's a valve one, it dry the resistor out, then it'll soak up water, it'll expand, and that changes them over time. Now, some people think that sounds good. I happen to be one of them, but you do get a bit of noise and hiss sometimes, especially for amplifiers. But it's a trade-off. Right, there's... See, I find electronics much like socio-economics. There's a great guy over in America, Thomas Sowell. If anyone's ever read any of his books, fantastic. So he always says that geopolitical or socio-economic situations, there's no right and wrong answer. There's just trade-offs. And it's much like that. So you can put an old resistor in there and it'll sound great, but you'll get the hiss. Or you can put a new one in there and it'll sound new and you won't get the hiss. Anyway, I'm deviating again. So I haven't soldered the top tag because... Ooh, I untidied that one up very well. I haven't soldered the top tag because our other audiophile cap, 1UF cap, that's the size of a house basically compared to this tag board, brilliant, is going to go in here. Now, I'm going to use the same method. No, I'm not. So to be, I don't know, awkward, I'm gonna use the through the center pins method for this, so I'll leave that till later. And the reason being is it's just getting a bit congested in the middle here, and there's nothing going in. There's nothing on the outside that's going in these tags or going to be in its way, so I might as well use the other method because it's a bit simpler and, well, there's less in its way basically. So last component is going to be a 1 meg capacitor. 1 meg capacitor? What am I talking about? It's been a long duty. A 1 meg resistor, and it's just going to go straight up and down in the last set of lugs. There we are, and because our 1UF cap isn't going in here, it's going to go in the centre, we can solder this in. There. And we might as well tidy that up while we're here. And by tidy that up, I usually mean snip the legs off the end. Yeah. It makes sense in my mind. So, this is now going between this centre pin here, centre of this lug here, and the centre of this lug here. This is basically our output cap. That will be our anti-pop resistor. So I'm not sure this will need it, but there you go. I don't think you do much titting on and off of a buffer, do you? You just have it on, I would think. But there you go. That's what it is. There's one side soldered in, and the other side soldered in. I'm liking the look of that. Now, the last resistor is a 47 UF. Sorry, I'm doing it again. The last capacitor resistor. Come on, Joe. Game face. So the last capacitor is a 47 UF electrolytic, and that's going to go between the 9 volt and ground, and that's just to make it a bit quieter, take some of the ripple out of the DC voltage, I would imagine. So our live side is going to go here, third one along, and our negative side is going to go here, so it will be sat like so. I am going to use that method again, but only the bendy method, if you like, but only on this leg here. so that then the capacitor sits inside the perimeter of the board for no other reason. I'm throwing it everywhere here, but for no other reason than I like how that looks. I'm not a massive fan of them overhanging, but sometimes you can't help it. There we are, and I'll try and make that line up with them too, so then it looks neat together. I don't know, I should have probably used a smaller cap for this one. It would have been a bit more sensible. Yeah. Quite thick legs on this as well, so it takes a fair old bit of heat in there to get it to flow. There. Now, that's looking pretty good. All of the components are actually hid underneath the sides of the massive caps I've used. Brilliant. Now, before I don't like touching these too much before you put them in the Alice DCA 55, because temperature affects them loads. But then again, if you touch them and the temperature affects them loads, you probably don't want to put it in your pedal. So I don't know. Again, with the trade-offs. So here we go. For this here, we have our collector goes in this one, our base here, and our emitter here. So I'm envisaging that I'm not going to have to cross over legs on this transistor. I seem to remember that this is a straightforward one, the NKT 271. As in the fact that it goes emitter base collector, or collector base emitter, whichever way around you want to look at it. Sometimes if the base is one of the outside legs, then you have to cross them over, especially, I don't know, with the silicon transistors, maybe, mainly. So can you see that? Again, PNP transistor, that's our layout. Let's just check the leakage. So, there you go. Leakage current is up to 0.459. That's way above what I'd use for anything, which is probably why I put it in the dud pile. Is when it gets hot, it changes massively. The military spec ones tend not to, and I know before anyone writes in a comment, I can use a diode across the collector and the base to stop the temperature from affecting this transistor. It'd be fine. I get that, but I just don't want to. Oh, do you know what? After all of that, because I was waffling on, I didn't even look which the pinout was. I mean, I think that's the collector because it's got a dot on it. But you know, it's not worth taking a chance of soldering in and then it being wrong and I'll have to resolder it. So let's do that again, Joe, with a little bit more care this time, I think. There we are. So the red is the collector, as I suspected. Green is the emitter. Blue is the base. So collector, base, emitter. So when I put it in my circuit, it wants to go this way round. Now, because I've been a genius and soldered into the and soldered into one of the center holes that I normally put the transistors in, it's going to have to sit through these lugs here. That's fine. So what I'm actually going to do is I'll make it a little bit longer and I'll solder in this center pin, which is the base, and then I'll get it straight. So then when I solder the other two legs in, the body of the transistor's sitting vertical and straight. That really doesn't matter, but I just like how it looks. And as we all know, if it looks good, it sounds good, right? Right, there we go. Just give them legs a quick tidy up. Now, annoyingly, the way that I've fitted it, the actual letters NKT271 are facing into these caps here, and that's fine. But for me, it's not fine. So I'm just going to bend bend it backwards like this. So if anyone opens up the pedal and happens to look inside, they'll be able to see that it's a Newmarket transistor. I don't know if anyone really cares about that, but I really do. So there's our 2 buffers ready to go. Which one do we think is going to sound better? Vintage style germanium, leaky germanium AMZ buffer, or the Unicorn Classic Yukon Bendy Klon buffer? Let's get them installed in the enclosure. Actually, forgot to show the enclosure at the beginning of this. So these are my newer 2-part enclosures. I've just been sent a batch of them from China, oddly enough. They are V-shaped, and because it's winter now here in the UK, it's really hard to spray nitrocellulose properly. So I'm starting to move over to my leatherette covered pedals. I figured I'd go with this leatherette that I had left over from previous builds. It is a little bit marked, but it will do for this video. I'd love to know what you think about these enclosures. Should I carry on with these, or should I go back to struggling on with nitrocellulose, or a bit of both? Right, I'm going to go ahead and get the circuits installed in here. This is where our switch is going to go to switch between the 2 of them. So I'll get that populated and then we'll carry on with the wiring. This is our Klon and AMZ germanium buffer now mounted inside the enclosure. I've had to really squeeze to get this this NKT in there. It's really close to this, which is a little bit worrying. Maybe I'll knock it down a bit, but I do want people to be able to see it's an NKT. It's a bit of a vanity thing, isn't it? What's the point in using it if you can't see it? Anyway, so to wire it up first, I'm going to start off by wiring in these wires that are already in place, because they're kind of in the way and you might as well just get them out the way. And the top one is a ground, so to use that I'm going to run it right the way to the top here and across. How I like to do it is across these 2 jacks. So because that's the length I need, I just cut it there, and now if I hold it in place I can take a pinch there, and this is the bit that I need to skin, because this will be the bit that creates like a ground, like a ground buzz bar, if you like. I don't know what you call it in this case. So in big machines you would have like a buzz bar for, you know, each different phase and ground. Well, that's what this is going to be. So I'll tin it. And then slide it in the air plug of the first jack, of our output jack on this side. And then into the other jack, earth. And now I can use this as a point to run any other earths off if I need to. I don't think, apart from the buffer, the other buffer, sorry, the AMZ buffer earth, I don't think I'll need to, but there you go. Or maybe actually I will do for the LED. But as with my last couple of videos, I haven't got any LEDs with me because I forgot them. Brilliant, well done, Joe. So I'll have to fit that at a later date. Right. I'll leave that because I'm going to run another line for the air for this, so it can just hang there for a minute. The top one of these is going to be our input. So am I going to have this as the up or down position? So I'm going to run this round the back and it can be the down position, so I'll attach the up part of this switch because it works in opposites. Brilliant. Now because the input jack's on the left hand side, I'm going to put the input of the circuit the left hand side too, just so then I remember. I mean, it doesn't matter as long as you get them the right, like the input to the input type of thing, but it's much easier to remember it that way, I think. there's our input. And then this one here is our output, so I'm going to run it in the same fashion, only it's going to go into the other lug at the top. Now, I forgot to bring my purple cable ties, annoyingly, so I'll have to cable tie this when I get home, because having dangly wires everywhere drives me absolutely nuts. So to cable tie, it helps if you run the wires as close to where you want them to sit as possible, and then just use the cable ties to pull them all together. So that's what I'm doing here. There's our input and output. Now the last wire on this part of the circuit is alive, so that's the 9 volts. I'm going to run this round to here. Now, rather than soldering it in straight away, I'm going to cut it to the right length and strip it. But I'm going to do the old technique that I showed previously, where to fan out the fan out the fibers. Oh shoot! I cut a little bit too much off there. So fan out the fibers and then just snip a couple of them off to make it thinner. And then I'm also going to run another wire through here, because this is going to go to our AMZ buffer. So that then we've got our our lives all in the same lug. So it leaves one lug on the DC jack spare, one positive lug spare, to run round and attach to our LED. Now, because I don't use a battery in my my pedals, I can join both the lugs together, the 9 volt positive lugs together, and it gives me like an extra place to solder to. Whereas if you're using a battery, of course you've got to keep them separate, and all of the 9 volts will have to go into the same pin. Right, now you should see in there that I've left a little bit hanging over, and that is because it's going to attach to the other 9 volt lug, if you like, once I have the LED soldered in. So let's sort these wires out into some sort of semblance of order, because they're driving me insane. There we go. So when I come to cable tie all these together, they'll sit nicely. Now I'm going to move on to our germanium buffer. So the 9 volt for the germanium buffer, annoyingly, because of the way that I've positioned it, is the 3rd pin along, so it's right at the back here. So I'm going to send this over here. In fact, I'm not. It's kind of annoying me that I'm going to have some going this side and some going that side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip it and send it round this side, so then I only have one run of cables, cable tied together. And this can come round here while this is sliding everywhere and attach it into the board over here. So we'll snip it there and tin it. Now, I don't know if you can see from there, but I've stripped probably a little bit too much there. So when I put that through the hole, there's going to be loads hanging out. I'm going to have to try and squeeze in with these to clip it off. So I'm just going to clip it short now, so then when I do solder it in, I don't have to faff about trying to clip it. I may even be able to just bend that out the way for now. what you've got to be careful of, because I've situated this board so close to this switch, that you don't foul the switch with the little leg that hangs out of the wire, or any of the components really, because the body of the switch has a little bit of metal on it which is also earthed to the enclosure, and what you don't want to do is earth your 9 volts to the enclosure, because that would be horrific. Okay, I feel like we're getting there. So the other lug that, since bending this out the way, the other lug that is exposed is the output of our AMZ buffer. So I'm going to go ahead and put the output wire in now. And that is of course opposite the output wire of our Klon buffer, which went into this lug right here. So this one is going to go into this lug here. What I like to do when I'm running my wires is I start from the point that, like the end, and I run the snipped and tinned end round to where it's going to connect, and in that way your wires basically run by the time you're done soldering. I'm just going to make this the strip part a bit smaller so then I don't foul the switch as previously mentioned. So there we go. Now when I pull this, it should just lie itself down in the right place, which is handy. And that's just going to go into that lug there. Ideal. Tell you what, I haven't had any more trainees called to try and turn in early. Maybe word's got around. The chief's had enough. So now I'll float this cap right back over now where it was, because we're done soldering underneath it. Next we've got our, oh, I see what I've done, damn. So that lug there was actually the output, not the input. Disaster. So I've actually put that into the wrong hole. Now put it into the wrong hole, come on Joe. Anyway, easily done, which is why after every solder joint it's always good just to look back at your layout and make sure that you're doing it in the right order. As if you're like me, I'm just a little bit dyslexic and mess things up. If there's 2 wires next to each other, inadvertently I'll put it in the wrong place, or if I'm reading out numbers that are maybe 5 or longer digits, especially service numbers, I'll always mix up the last 2 numbers. Can't help myself. Anyway, never been tested for anything of course, because when I was younger and when I first joined the Navy, we just called it being stupid. Of course we've moved on from that now. So now I'm going to wire in the input. Now I've got a choice here for the way that I'm going to wire this one. Usually I'd run it from here, a long length of wire round, in through this little gap, spread it under, and then try and come back on myself and get into this lug right here next to the body. Or I could just go round this way and have a second cable run. Well, I'm not going to be lazy, I'm going to run a longer wire. I know it may sound worse because the wire's longer, yada yada yada, but when I cable tie it all together it'll look better. So that's the way I'm going to go. So we have our tinned end here, and I'll slot it through. I mean, you don't have to take this much care on the way that you route your wires. As long as all the points are connected, it'll work. I mean, if you open up a 60s magnetone amp and have a look at the point to point in there. It's like a snake's wedding or a spider's party or something. There's like legs going everywhere and wires running everywhere. It's insane. So, and they sound great. And you know, I think they're fairly well built. They're robust. They've lasted this long. So you can kind of go down a crazy route. I've done it with a few amplifiers before now. Of course, with some circuits you can't because you induce noise, but no. Because I left that leg too long, I've got to try and squeeze the snips in. Pain, but there you go. Now getting this in is going to be a bit awkward because not only have I got to squeeze it in this little gap past all these components, I've got to do it into a joint that's already had solder in it, so it won't just sit in nicely. Fantastic. Well done, Joe. So to do this, I find it much easier if you're holding it with... Ah, my lights just died. Brilliant. Does anything else want to go wrong, anyone? Right, light changed. I find, as I was saying, it much easier to not lose the thing you were soldering. Where's that gone? There it is. So I find it much easier to hold the wire with a tool rather than your fingers when you're doing this, because it can get hot. I advise you not to use the snips like I'm using, because the tendency is when you're concentrating is to squeeze a little bit too hard with your left hand and you end up snipping the end off your wire. I've done that countless times, but there you go. And then usually I would advise going round afterwards and redoing that solder joint, but from here I can see it's actually looking pretty good, so I'm not going to do it. Just more heat in something that doesn't need to be there. The temptation when you're first starting out to solder everything to death is so bad. Yeah, I can't tell you how many components I've killed that way, so I'm not going to do it, especially switches. Now here comes the... oh wait, there, we haven't done the ground. We've got the two grounds. So in this AMZ Germanium buffer circuit, there are two grounds. One is this corner here, and then one is this corner over here. So I'm going to run them out separately. We'll start with this one. I'm going to follow the wires here as I run it. Then one end is going to go into the actual earth on our 9-volt jack. So this earth plug here. But I'm going to skin the wire long so I can push it up and attach it onto this earth here. So you get one wire basically from here connecting to that and right the way round. Just makes sense to me, so I'm going to start with that. And I'm going to start with the end that is more difficult, and that's the jack end. My advice if you're going to do this is to get it through the jack and situate it roughly where you want it to go. Wet your tip, well, hey, and just solder this jack in first. You don't want to put too much solder on there like I've just done. And then you can, while that's soldered in, you can actually manipulate this end fairly well and get it basically vertical up if that's what you want. It doesn't have to be vertical. And then solder that in, and that end's sorted. Then the wire that runs off this, I'm going to push it down and just run it in the same manner as the others, so when I cable tie it together, it's all going to run together as one wiring loom, and I just like how that looks. I mean, again, you don't have to do that. So there's one earth in. Now the next earth I'm going to run from this here. I'm going to run it along this round. And it's going to come through here to this. But also I'm going to run 2 wires. I could come from here round to this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to run 2 wires. They're going to come round. One will go to here and one will go to here. So if I measure that wire out roughly, that should do it. And then cut 2 of them. What I can do is strip them both together and then just give them a twist straight away. And then tin. And then I can just solder these 2 wires straight into the earth on the input jack. He says if you can get it in there. And then I won't need to run another wire now really. These 2 should be the last 2 earth wires. Of course I'm going to have to run other wires, but not earth wires, that is. That's where I want to cut that bad boy. I mean, how does everyone normally route their earth wires? Do you run them one at a time, or run them in a daisy chain maybe? I kind of flip-flop between the 2, depending on, well, it's just random really. I mean, if you open up a couple of my Kossoff drives or my Range Masters and stuff, you'll see them, the earth wired up in different ways. You know, certain batches have it certain ways, and sometimes I'll daisy chain some in the same batch and then run different wires for some in the same batch. It's kind of a bit random, but generally I can't hear the difference. I like how it looks both ways actually. Right, now this last earth wire is going to be for our LED. No, I don't think. There you go. I have. Thought I hadn't put enough wire on it then. That would have been emotional. Constantly trying to manipulate these wires into the place that I want until I get the cable tie on them, which I haven't got here, which is going to be annoying. So that's going to stick out while I'm wiring the rest of them. Frustrating. So next we're going to move on to wiring in the input and output on the switch. So the input of the circuit is going to come from this lug here, and it's going to go to this lug here on the switch. Again, I'm going to strip and tin one end. This is kind of the most difficult end because there's not lots of space. There we are. Now this wire is going to run right the way round, following the one that we've already got in place. and go to here. They are going to be kind of flapping in the wind while I'm soldering. It's so annoying. Normally I'll have cable ties with me and maybe put a cable tie on it while I work or what have you. I mean, come on, this is absolutely overkill for a buffer. No one needs two buffers in one and to switch between them because they basically do the same thing, right? There's going to be tons of people that tell me that this is pointless and both of them sound exactly the same, or both of them do nothing even, because when it comes to the test, I am going to use my coily cable just to maybe add some capacitance in there and resistance or whatever, try and degrade the signal, but who knows, I don't know if that'll be enough to hear the difference from the buffers, but we'll see. Now this wire here is our output. Just from this lug here on the switch. Always tin these cables. If you're not using solid core, always tin the cables, the wires, sorry, because you don't get the little straddlers that like sometimes hang out the sides of your connection. No one wants that. It's just asking for a point of failure, really. Right, there we go. That is our switch wired up. So our input and output. Before I forget, because I say it all the time, but I do always forget. Maybe I got PTSD from forgetting this this cable all the time. But I'm going to do the bypass cable. Anyone who builds pedals will know this. That you go to test your pedal, you start with it off and there's no sound. You're like, oh my god, what's happened? And when you turn the pedal on, it works, and it's usually because, especially for me, it's usually because I forgot this. A little tiny loop on your switch that the signal goes through if you've got the pedal in bypass. Right, now, last but not least, I'm going to wire in the input and the output from the jacks, that is. So we start with the input because that's going to run the longest, because it's on that side of the pedal. So we're going to go round through here, and as you can see that I'm going right the way round the back of everything, then into our input jack. Like so. And then this wire is going to come round and follow the wiring loom as previously done, right the way round to that input there. our signal is going to come from, oh, I missed tidying up that, I don't want to leave that there. What am I doing? So our signal is going to come from the input jack here, round into the switch. And we can either send it bypass or send it through the actual circuit. It'll come round through the wiring loom again and go to the input of this switch here. Then from this switch it can either go to our Klon buffer or to our, our Klon buffer or our Germanium buffer. Then it'll go through the circuit, whichever one, come back round and it'll either come in from this one or from this one and go to this connection here, which is our output, round the wires and into here, which will then be connected to this lug, and the final wire I'm about to add will connect that to the output. And that is pretty much our AMZ / Klon buffer wired up. I personally think this one went quite well. I'm really hoping when we turn it on that two things really. The Germanium buffer works as good, if not better, than the Klon buffer, because then I can reuse all of my dud Germanium transistors for something actually cool. You know, you can imagine how many transistors I've bought over the years that have, you know, been quite frankly damn expensive, but unable to be used in most of the pedals that I build because they're ridiculous. They're old and are out of spec and ridiculous pricing. Well, at least I'll get to use them. And B, I hope that there's actually a difference between a Klon buffer and a Germanium buffer, otherwise it's kind of all for nothing. Or maybe if there's no difference between them, but there's a difference between a bypass signal and them. Funny story though, when I built my first buffer, I built it was an AMZ actually, an AMZ Strato Blaster, if anyone remembers them. I think that's what it was called. It was like meant to go inside your guitar. But I had no clue what a buffer was. I thought it was good. You know, I read all the forums, and back then, you know, the forums weren't probably at the standard that they are now. Not that I go on them much, but lots of people were saying how it was like a little boost and clarity and all these nice, you know, transparent clarity, all these nice tone words. And I built this AMZ Strato Blaster, plugged it in, turned it on, nothing happened. Like, oh, I've broke it. I went over everything, checked everything, plugged it in, turned it on, nothing happened. Same signal. And what I realised is I was using a tiny short cable from my guitar into the Strato Blaster and then straight into an amp with another short cable. Ipso facto, didn't need a buffer. Brilliant. Well done, Joe. Do you know, I never got over that buffer not working, and I didn't build anything like that for years. Not until I built my first Klon buffer, actually. I was like, they don't do anything. And of course, then I discovered Gearman do, and the coily cable, and then that pedal show, and kind of learned what, you know, cable capacitance was, because, well, there you go. Now, this is fully wired up. In the down position, in the up position, it's going to connect the center lugs to the bottom, which is going to be our Germanium. And then in the down center is going to be off because this is an on-off-on switch and I want to use the short lever. Down position, it's going to connect them to the upper lugs, which is going to connect our Klon buffer. Excellent. Can't wait to get these cable ties on because that little overhang is annoying the living crap out of me. Now, there is no knob to add to this one because there's no volume and anything. It is just a one-to-one amplifier. That's what buffers are. Let's get a sound sample.
And now it's on to the sound sample. I'm going to be pitting the Klon buffer against the AMZ Germanium buffer. You'll hear it playing directly through my Victory V40 amplifier using a coily cable to add in a little bit of capacitance. I'd like to know in the comments, firstly, which buffer you prefer, if any, and secondly, do the buffers make any difference anyway? that you've made it to the end of this video, you'll absolutely love this video that shows you how to build an Abbey Road fuzz from start to finish. I hold nothing back in this one.